One of the most engaging books I've read in the last year is Erik Larson's The Splendid and the Vile. I have mentioned it before. It is a chronicle of the first year of the prime ministership of Winston Churchill. And his first year in office coincided with trying to persuade the United States to enter World War II. And about the end of his first year was Pearl Harbor when the United States did. And Larson chronicles the nearly week-by-week events in Churchill's life in London and the broader British Isles, and the life of Adolf Hitler in Germany and what Hitler was doing in Germany. It's a fascinating read, going back and forth. Here's England and Churchill, here's Germany and Hitler, from various military plans and their own personal doings. You get a bit of what Churchill liked to eat for dinner and all the rest thrown in for fun, but it's back and forth, and it's quite engaging. I can only imagine if somehow Larson were able to put into Churchill's mind, if we would be outside of time and going back and somehow slipping into Churchill's hand, just as Churchill walked into his war rooms there under 13 Downing Street in London, the war rooms where Churchill stayed most of the time and did a lot of planning. His secretaries and others sometimes stayed the night there. This large bunker, I can only imagine if one time before Churchill took his cabinet into those small rooms around that table, if someone would have handed Churchill Hitler's obituary. Can you imagine what would have taken place in those rooms? Those rooms were tense. The meetings went late at night, somewhat because of Churchill's crazy schedule to have a late afternoon nap. So he had 2 days every one day, while all of his secretaries didn't. So they were doing everything they could to stay awake, and Churchill's just fine. Why are you guys so sleepy? He had his 3-hour nap in his bath. And this was his routines, but those meetings were so intense. Literally, Hitler making such rapid progress that Churchill thought, this is the end of the free world if we cannot stop him. There's no stopping him around the globe, and it will be a totalitarian regime. And the intensity of this, you can just imagine, so discouraging sometimes, hearing of France falling so quickly and the bombardment that's coming toward England and the progress of Hitler across. You can imagine if someone hands him, this is Hitler's obituary. It's dated appropriately. It's dated accurately when it's going to come. But this is what's going to happen. You can imagine what that would have done to Churchill and his secretaries. And Churchill was known as one who dressed up the English language and sent it into battle. He had the uncanny ability to make people believe things were going well when it was rather bleak, just to keep the hope going. You can imagine he would have chuckled getting that. Now I've really got something to work with. That's what John does in Revelation 18. Here's the obituary of Babylon. To you, struggling believers, to you that are receiving this revelation that John's writing from Patmos because he's in exile, suffering himself, to you who are receiving this, to you whose heart is expressed in the words of the saints in heaven who are already martyred. To you whose worldview is expressed in chapter 6 at the breaking of the fifth seal, How long, O Lord, until you avenge our blood? That's their worldview in a sentence. This is John's audience. Here's the obituary of your opponents and of Babylon. All this is anticipating chapter 19 that Ben will begin to unpack for us next week in the progress of the obituary of Satan finally being cast into the lake of fire. The beast and the false prophet with Satan, where they were burned forever and ever. One of the features that we have tried to note along the way in our study of Revelation is the literary arrangement of the book. And we need to do justice to this. This is why I'm wanting to think with you about a reading party that you're going to have with your family or MCG, whatever it would be, sometime the week of October 29th or November 5th this year. Continue to set these dates out for you. I introduced this idea a few weeks ago to sit and read all of Revelation in one gathering. You may need to take a break at some point, have some snacks, move through audibly hearing it, and you will see the connections, the integrity of what John is writing and appreciate it even more. Again, it's as if at any point in the book, John sort of assumes that his audience has read all of it. The best way to appreciate Revelation is second time through, at least, or third time through. That's how you really get it, is after you've sort of gotten it. Does that make sense? And that's what I want you to appreciate. And along the way, what you're going to find, there are peculiar analytics, results of analytics that could be gathered up here. If we were to do a data analysis on Revelation, one of the features that we would recognize is that as the seals and trumpets and bowls progress, those sequences of 7, the word count generally shrinks. Not at every place, but generally speaking, it shrinks. Less description, more just this is what happens. But then we arrive here at chapters 17 and 18, and the word count is quite large, really. Everything slows down. There's a lot of detail. In fact, we're going to see in Revelation 18 in a moment, we're going to read the whole chapter, and then we're going to walk back through and think about God's character here. This is part 2 of a 2-part series that we began a couple of weeks ago by looking at chapter 17 and now here in chapter 18. And when we're thinking about these 2 chapters together and the fall of Babylon and the civil war that takes place at the end of chapter 17 as the kings of the earth overtake the entity of Babylon itself in anticipation of them coordinating with Satan to come against the saints. Now we have a bit of an interlude even in that in chapter 18 with the heavenly perspective and then also the perspective of those on earth, these kings of the earth who mourn, these merchants, the maritime guild that mourns over Babylon because all that they had in the structures of this city controlled by Satan, riding on Satan, they've lost it. It's all imploded, and they mourn. There are dirges here. That's what we have in chapter 18 in this slow perspective, this obituary, if you will. And the language slows down, becomes highly descriptive. As I read this, I think about Charles Dickens. I think about A Christmas Carol, a common illustration here. If you've read the book, you remember Dickens writing about Fezziwig's party and all of the food and how ornately Dickens describes smells, sights. Your mouth waters when you read that book, that section. That is what John, on the inspiration of the Spirit, is doing here. Listing the various entities that are no longer traded in Babylon over and over again, slowing down. This is the obituary, and all of this to encourage these saints. How long, O Lord? It will happen, and this is what it's going to look like. Notice with me in the text, Revelation 18. After this, I saw another angel with great authority coming down from heaven, and the earth was illuminated by his splendor. He cried out in a mighty voice, "It is fallen. Babylon the Great has fallen. She has become a dwelling for demons, a haunt for every unclean spirit, a haunt for every unclean bird, and a haunt for every unclean and despicable beast. For all the nations have drunk the wine of her sexual immorality, which brings wrath. The kings of the earth have committed immorality with her, and the merchants of the earth have grown wealthy from her excess luxury." Then I heard another voice from heaven. "Come out of her, my people, so that you will not share in her sins or receive any of her plagues. For her sins are piled up to heaven, and God has remembered her crimes. Pay her back the way she also paid, and double it, according to her works. In the cup in which she mix a double portion for her. As much as she glorified herself and lived luxuriously, give her that much torment and grief, because she says in her heart, 'I sit as queen. I'm not a widow. I'll never see grief.' Therefore, her plagues will come in one day. Death, grief, famine, she'll be burned with fire, because the Lord God who judges her is mighty. The kings of the earth who have committed sexual immorality and lived luxuriously with her will weep and mourn over her when they see the smoke of her burning. They stand far off in fear of her torment, saying, 'Woe, woe, the great city Babylon, the mighty city! For in a single hour your judgment has come.' The merchants of the earth will also weep and mourn over her, because no one buys their merchandise any longer. Merchandise of gold, silver, precious stones, pearls, fine fabrics of linen, purple, silk, and scarlet. All kinds of fragrant wood products, objects of ivory, objects of expensive wood, brass, iron, marble, cinnamon, spice, incense, myrrh, and frankincense, wine, olive oil, fine wheat flour, grain, cattle and sheep, horses and carriages, and human bodies and souls. The fruit you craved has left you. All your splendid and glamorous things are gone. They will never find them again. The merchants of these things who became rich from her will stand far off in fear of her torment, weeping and mourning, saying, 'Woe, woe, the great city, clothed in fine linen, purple and scarlet, adorned with gold, precious stones, and pearls.' Because in a single hour, such fabulous wealth was destroyed. Every shipmaster, seafarer, the sailors, and all who do business by the sea stood far off as they watched the smoke from her burning and kept crying out, 'Who is like the great city?' They threw dust on their heads and kept crying out, weeping and mourning, 'Woe, woe, the great city, where all those who have ships on the sea became rich from her wealth.' because in a single hour she was destroyed. Rejoice over her, heaven, you saints, apostles, prophets, because God has executed your judgment on her. Then a mighty angel picked up a stone like a large millstone and threw it into the sea, saying, in this way, Babylon, the great city, will be thrown down violently, never be found again. The sound of harpists, musicians, flutists, trumpeters will never be heard in you again. No craftsman of any trade will ever be found in you again. The sound of a mill will never be heard in you again. The light of a lamp will never shine in you again. And the voice of a groom and bride will never be heard in you again. All this will happen because your merchants were the nobility of the earth, because all the nations were deceived by your sorcery. And the blood of the prophets and saints and all those slaughtered on earth was found in you. The obituary of Babylon with dirges interspersed. This section, chapters 17 and 18, flow into chapter 19, as we will see next week, and these continued songs, no longer dirges, but songs of praise, songs of thanksgiving and joy, as they iterate even here. Alexander Stewart, summarizing this unit, states the idea this way. Even though some of the details in the vision of the beast in Revelation 17 are hard to pin down, the main points of chapters 17 and 18 are clear. Babylon the Great helps the dragon and the beasts in their war against God's people throughout history. She represents religious, economic, and cultural seduction and corresponds to the rival Christian leaders who tried to get Christians to compromise in order to avoid persecution. This was the main danger confronting the churches of Revelation 2 and 3. And now we are able to identify the demonic power behind this false teaching. Against pressure to compromise with society in order to fit in, avoid persecution and ridicule, and get ahead financially, John's visions seek to motivate us to faithfulness no matter the cost. And that faithfulness is encouraged when we understand what's to come of our opponents. It's this logic that we saw even today in Equipping Hour, you who were in the class on prayer that Zach led for us there in thinking from 2 Thessalonians 1. We see the same kind of an idea in a different format over and over, the encouragement of believers because of what's to come to our opponents. Not what we will do in overthrowing them, not that we are going to overtake them militarily or politically in some way, but God will have His way in the end, and He will judge. We will be separated. We will be victorious. I want to answer the question with you this morning, how does God reveal His character in judgment? As we read, you noticed over and over in these dirges the themes of God's character that come up, and His justice especially. I want you to notice God's might and justice. This is proclaimed at the outset, and it's even spoken by these who profited from Babylon, from the world system. Their voices are offered in sequence. The kings, the merchants, the maritime guild, over and over at the central point of this chapter, and their words are instructive for us before we conclude with the statement of God's justice and why He pays them back, this entity and these who will be destroyed individually with Babylon, because in the midst of all of the sin of luxury and the poverty that would come upon Babylon in its destruction, it's the blood of the saints that God is primarily concerned about. Scott Duvall says the idea this way: much of the book of Revelation is about God's judgment of evil. God's judgment of evil flows directly out of his covenant love for his people and his holy and righteous character. We'll notice God's character as we progress in these scenes, and we'll conclude with thinking about three Christian doctrines that rise to the surface here in chapter 13, and we'll celebrate chapter 18 rather, and we'll celebrate the Lord's Supper around those doctrines. Join with me then, verses 1 through 8, and notice God's might that is declared from heaven. Notice God's justice in this indictment and his might in it. This angel from heaven, we're familiar with angelic revelations, and this angel illuminates the earth. We're mindful in verse 1 already that we have the spatial dualism of Revelation, heaven and earth, just as we noted in Daniel in setting up Revelation and understanding that this is a way that God communicates of his character. He is in heaven, and the spatial dualism with what he has created on earth reminds us of his superiority as creator. One of the features of this spatial dualism is to remind us that God is the creator. He's outside of time. He's different. And he sends angelic emissaries to earth to reveal himself, to speak his messages, even after Jesus' death and resurrection and ascension. This is the sequence. God is different. He is in heaven. He rules. And this angel comes to earth from heaven, and he cries out. He uses words. God is a God who is different, yet he's a God who wants to be known. And that's why he speaks. And he spoke finally in his Son, in that message that is now reflected by these angels. And this angel cries out about the fallenness of Babylon the Great, this haunt. Verse 3, the nations have drunk the wine of her immorality, which brings wrath. Do you notice the fusion of sin in verse 3? Immorality is fused with luxury. These themes are not unique in terms of their fusion here in Revelation 18. Paul notes these same kinds of connections when he speaks about immorality. Often greed is involved, often idolatry as well. And that's one of the features here. This immorality is this spiritual immorality, though physical immorality very well may be in the understanding as well, but it's this immorality of taking for oneself something that's not theirs. And luxury, wealth and luxury here. And this theme will come up repeatedly. The nations have drunk of this. And this is a characteristic of Babylon, riding on Satan and fueled by him. And what we have here, the manifestation of Satan in these sins, these characteristics of Babylon. Satan in his greed and selfishness. It's all natural then, isn't it, that Babylon would be characterized by the same selfishness. And there are few physical activities more selfish than immorality. And luxury and wealth, that's me, mine. Luxury is selfishness in material gain, and immorality is selfishness and sensual pleasure. Whichever sin you're talking about, the core is me. The writer fits well on the instrument. I heard another voice, verse 4, from heaven. Come out of her, my people. Come out of her, my people, so that you will not share in her sins or receive any of her plagues. This other voice is an evangelistic voice, if you will. Come out, be separate. There is a spatial dualism of heaven and earth that represents God's character and greatness and the earthly sphere that He created. And angels, emissaries coming from God with this message. There's dualism there. And mark it well, there should be a dualism of humanity in this sense. God's people should be separated from Babylon, from sinners, in how we live. Brothers and sisters, we are at the end of the Bible, and we are being told, come out of her. Don't be characterized by immorality, by greed. If you haven't gotten the message yet, it's as if the angel says, come out. And if not, there is a warning. Because those whose lives are characterized by immorality and greed will perish with her. Doesn't matter if you're a king of the earth, a wealthy merchant, or someone whose profit is on the sea. We'll recognize shortly. Come out of her. Verse 5, her sins are piled up. Notice God remembered her crimes. It's not as though He forgot. This is the anthropomorphism. God is thinking about it. It's on His mind. He's going to judge. He's going to pay her back. And notice the justice here. It's justice at the micro level. It's not just justice in terms of lex talionis. You did this, you get this back. It's the exact instrument justice. Notice the text. Pay her back. Look, verse 6. In the cup in which she mix a double portion for her. As much as she glorified herself and lived luxuriously, give her that much torment and grief. Give her poverty to the degree of her luxury. One characteristic of verses 6 through 8 is the characteristic of degree. The degree to which she had, let that be the degree to which is taken. Seems like she had everything. Take it all. She says in her heart, and notice that even in the temporal expediency of her judgment. Verse 7, I will never see grief again. Keep that in mind as we get to verses 21 through 24, because there we see the word never over and over again. I'll never see grief. Therefore, her plagues are going to come in one day. Notice the degree of her expected longevity and the degree of her quick demise. Enduring? No. In fact, expedient judgment. She'll be burned with fire because the Lord God who judges her is mighty. His justice, His might are declared from heaven. These are like the public charges. This is the indictment that's read publicly. This is the beginning of the obituary and her demise. And it's sung, if you will. In verses 9 through 20, we have in sequence the kings of the earth, the merchants of the earth, and the shipmasters. We'll just use the phrase maritime business guild. The grouping of shipbuilders and those who do trade on the sea, all of them together who profited so much in the ancient world because of trade along the Mediterranean especially, and that in view here, and wealth that came with it. Notice the kings of the earth, and they committed immorality and they lived luxuriously with it. That is, they exploited the system of Babylon, the city, for all they could in their power. And notice their weeping and mourning. In verse 10, they stand far off. Progress with me to verse 15. The merchants. The merchants are those who also became rich from her. The system of Babylon, likely John's readers thinking of ancient Rome, though those who were Jewish, no doubt reflecting on ancient Babylon, and perhaps Jeremiah 50 and 51's ringing in the back of their mind, perhaps Isaiah's indictments of Babylon as well. And notice verse 15, they stand. Did you see the connection with verse 15? And verse 10? The kings are far off, the merchants are far off. And we progress even further to verse 17. And these shipmasters, seafarers, they all stand afar off. All these groups are at a distance, standing far off. Grant Osborne writes, the kings who grew rich from her, the merchants who shared her expanding markets, and the shipping people who carried her cargo all over the world stand far off. So they don't have to participate in her judgment. The purpose is to show the final end of those who participate in evil, the deep mourning for all that will be lost. Yet, in this as well as in the terrible hardness that depravity produces, none of these groups mourns over their sin, only the luxurious living they have lost. But we know that this is not the end sequence for these individuals. They are not free ultimately just to stand off and watch Babylon destroyed. We understand in the progress of chapter 19 and into chapter 20 that the devil who deceived humanity, the beast and the false prophet, are thrown into the lake of fire where all of sinful humanity will be forever and ever. We have here a brief interlude, a slow motion of Babylon, and an opportunity for these who gained wealth at the expense of Babylon, and their selfishness using the system, their selfishness for all it's worth here. They had opportunity in the system of Babylon, and their true character came out, selfishness and greed and power. So much so that they're weeping over it now, but its destruction is a foretaste of theirs. So the kings who say in verse 10, woe, woe, the great city, Babylon, the mighty city, for in a single hour your judgment has come, are actually foreshadowing their own judgment. The merchants again, and notice how slow the language is in verses 11 and 12. Notice the merchandise listed in verses 12, 13. Notice the number of specific objects. Slowing the pace down, none of those. It's almost as if John has here an itemized order that these merchants might use to check off, did we get the olives? Did we get the wood? Did we get this? The merchants have come, and now we need to check off. We're doing inventory. And it's almost as if John is listing out their inventory sheet. No, 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 no. He wants it to be specific. Don't miss the details. Don't miss the slow pace of the chapter so that you can get encouragement, because those things weren't yours now in the midst of your suffering. and you saw the wealthy and those who oppressed you have them. But understand, one day, the very list of objects that they ordered will be void and vacant. Verse 14, the fruit you craved has left you. All your splendid and glamorous things are gone. They'll never be seen again. Again, if we're just doing analytics and word count, notice how frequently in chapter 18 the word never comes. Never. It's final. The merchants who became rich, verse 15, they're standing far off. Woe, woe. They say words very similar to the kings and expand them a bit. Woe, this great city who was clothed in linen, purple, scarlet, adorned with gold. Look at the externals here. And what's so sad is all the external beauty, all the attractiveness of this system in a single hour is gone. Her wealth destroyed. It was said by Samuel when he was getting ready to anoint David, don't look at the outside, right? The Lord looks on the heart. In 1 Peter 3, Peter writes, don't let your attractiveness, wives, be from outward adornment, but of the heart. We would expect it then, wouldn't we? If God is the one who sees the heart, that no matter what the world system is in its external extravagance and luxury, God sees the heart and will judge. No matter what nation would oppress the church in any sphere of time, no matter its power, no matter its wealth, no matter its opportunity, God sees the heart. The same is true for the shipmasters, verse 17b. They watch again from afar. Who is like the great city? And their rhetorical question in verse 18 sets up the next couple of verses. Well, let's answer, who is like the great city? And the answer that would be expected, none. No one's like the great city. No one's this powerful. No entity is this mighty. No entity has this GDP. No nation system has this kind of potential and opportunity. And God brings it to an end. They threw dust on their heads, verse 19. They're weeping and mourning. Look what once was, all those ships, all the wealth, but in a single hour. Remember, she said, I'll never see grief. The degree to which she expects her endurance is matched by the degree of time and expediency of her fall. Never? Oh, just an hour. I don't think 60 minutes are necessarily on John's mind. I think it's that fast, as quickly as God would want. Verse 20 is harder to get at if we interpret the text verse by verse. Rejoice over her, heaven. Commentators are split, and who's the voice here? Is this the shipmasters now speaking to those in heaven? Rejoice over her. Perhaps the shipmasters in view with the throng of believers in heaven, or the persecuted saints in chapter 6 at the breaking of the fifth seal? Or is this an interlude from perhaps a different angel? Rejoice over her, heaven, and you saints, apostles, prophets, because God has executed your judgment on her. That is to say, God has executed her as you wanted. Because she did this to you, God is now doing this to her. That's your judgment. The judgment that you would have liked to have accomplished, God has now done. So much of verses 9 through 20 is about immorality and money. But at the heart of that is the heart of people, isn't it? Buste Fanning states the idea this way: much of Rome's bustling commercial life provided prosperity and basic necessities for its far-flung provinces as well as for its urban poor. The problem specified here is the tendency to regard material goods, especially luxury goods, as the goal and focus of life. Human existence does not consist of the material things people possess, even when they have the most or the best on offer. To make them the soul's desire, as Babylon did, tragically misconceives what is most central in human identity and prosperity. It worships and draws meaning from a false God instead of the true one. Spirituality is always expressed in one's economic pursuits for every human. We've seen here this fusion of pursuit of luxury and greed and immorality. These are two ways that spirituality is expressed. They're expressed in what we do economically, and they are expressed in what we do relationally and morally. They're not just expressed in what we do, they're expressed in how we see those entities. That as believers by the Spirit, we have a worldview to see through the here and the now, the earthliness. We are not earth dwellers, therefore we're not just about seizing more for the here and now, be it material things or pleasure experiences. We understand that both are fleeting. We're not earth dwellers. Our citizenship is in heaven. We're waiting for the new Jerusalem. This is our calling. This is who we are. We're able to see through it. And God is so kind, isn't He, that even when here and there in our lives we begin to pursue after that and we get it, we get the new car and we have a wreck. Believer begins to pursue some immorality, and you've never felt more guilt than that moment. That's God's kindness to us. Lest we be earth dwellers, lest we not come out of Babylon, lest we be destroyed with Babylon. All this is perfectly fair because at the core of Babylon's luxury and immorality is selfishness, and their selfishness as this system is expressed most particularly in its opposition to God. That's been Satan's strategy since the garden, and all of sinful humanity with him, including the entities that are spiritual that he empowers, the beast, the false prophet, the beast from the sea, the beast from the earth, all of these together operating in coordination with him. And at the core of Babylon and Satan's systematic program and their goals, it's not just to get the here and the now. That's simply an expression of who they are against God. People are for the here and the now. Satan's the here and the now because he's against God. Therefore, a part of their expression of who they are is going to be against God's people. And God's going to judge them for that. It's not just that greed is bad. It is. It's not just that it exploits humanity. It's not just that immorality is bad and takes advantage of people and ruins the immoralator. It does. But these are symptoms of Satan's selfishness, the world's selfishness. Satan's opposition to God, the world's opposition to God. This isn't just a moral confrontation. It's part of the spiritual battle of Revelation, and in Satan's crosshairs are God's people. The judgment is not just because of immorality, it's because Satan has come against God's people. And the system that rides on Satan naturally would. And so justice If justice is going to be done, well, persecution of the church is going to be the final indictment. Notice verses 21 to 24. This mighty angel picks up a stone like a large millstone, throws in the sea. In this way, here's the symbolic action. Babylon, the great city, be thrown down violently, never be found again. I said earlier that the word count slows down. It's a very large word count. The pace slows down. And a word that is repeated throughout chapter 18 is the word never. And in verses 21 through 23, there are different kinds of nevers in John's thinking. And this is the extreme never. Like no, not ever, in no way ever. In this way, Babylon, the great city, be thrown down violently, never found again. No harpists, musicians, flutists, trumpeters, never, in no way ever. No craftsman, no trade. None of these features which gave Babylon, which gave Rome all of its glory and splendor. It doesn't take but a brief look at an ancient history book with photos and pictures or touring these lands to see that the kinds of buildings and opulence of the ancient world, at hard labor and the cost of souls and all of this selfishness with the bullseye on God and His people. And it's all going to be undone. No lamp. Keep that in mind. Verse 23. What is John foreshadowing? No lamp found in her. Oh, and keep in mind, the city temple's not going to need a lamp because God will illumine it. His glory, God and the Lamb will be its light. No voice of bride or groom. Oh, what is coming in the next chapter? Oh, that's right, it's the bride. It's the groom coming. These metaphors that are surfacing here are going to be unpacked in a different way, different reference, but keep them in mind as we read. They'll never be heard in you again. The merchants, the nobility of the earth, all the nations, by your sorcery were deceived. Witchcraft, superstition, all of earthly selfishness in its decadent spirituality and deception exposed as false. But all of this ultimately, verse 24, because the blood of the prophets and the saints and the slaughtered on earth was found in you. That's the final issue. It's not just moral selfishness. This moral selfishness is an expression of spirituality and brings into mind the great holy war of humanity, with the operative power of Satan operating behind human institutions and individuals, and we, the church, God's people, marching on throughout history. This is not our home. We are not earth dwellers, and they are. Being an earth dweller means the here and the now, luxury, sensual pleasures, mine, because that is Satan's agenda against God. And this is not our home. We await the city to come. We are His people marching on, and a part of that's going to be suffering. Verse 24, blood of the prophets and saints, takes us immediately back to the breaking of the fifth seal in Revelation 6. How long, O Lord, until you avenge our blood? Scott Duvall says it this way: it's true that most of us will not suffer martyrdom, but we might be challenged to suffer in less dramatic, but still very tangible and real ways. Such suffering could include ridicule, exclusion, economic punishment. Persecution doesn't have to be physical to be persecution. It can be economic, social, political, religious. Nevertheless, Revelation calls us to live a willing to die kind of life. For John to end with verse 24 provides us a platform for celebrating the Lord's Supper today. As you are grabbing the elements for us to celebrate, I want to call your attention to 3 Christian doctrines for our meditation. Number 1 is the doctrine of perseverance. Right here we have the doctrine of perseverance of the saints. That is, being willing to give our all, even death, blood, the blood that was shed. This implies that blood has been shed. We understand it's being shed and will be. It's a willingness to die, and therefore a willingness to die the 1,000 small deaths in persevering. This is a Christian doctrine that is here in Revelation. That our perseverance is a participation in this battle. That we continue on denying ourselves, seeking after Him, and we do that together as a fellowship. The second doctrine that is here is the doctrine of sanctification in Revelation 18. Come out of her. Come out. This is a statement that we all need to hear regularly. You might be here today thinking, I'm kind of feeling guilty today because I needed to hear that. You need to hear that on your best day. We need to hear this every day because we're 1,000 times a day being told, stay. Not just stay, invest. Drink deep. This is your one life. This is all you got. Best shot now. You may never be this age again, so you better take advantage. The doctrine of sanctification, come out. Brothers and sisters, we are different. If you're living differently than your neighbors, what should you expect? Young person, if you're living differently than those around you, this is the new covenant. This is Jesus' blood for you. You're holy. The friends around you may not be. Third, we think about blood here. We think about the doctrine of justification because this takes us back to Revelation chapter 1. And Jesus, the one who redeemed us by His blood. This Jesus who brought us to Himself through His blood. This blood that cleanses. This blood that makes us God's people. Perseverance, sanctification, justification. If you'll open up that cellophane and take hold of that cracker that reminds us of Jesus' broken body, that we are His body, we are His people, we are persevering together. We are together sanctified, relying on one another to be God's people, to be out of the world. Listen, to be out of the world does not mean be alone. It means uniting with the people of God. To be justified. Let's eat in remembrance of Christ. In Revelation 19:13, we read, Jesus, coming from heaven, wore a robe stained with blood. It's his blood that saves us. And if we must shed ours, it would simply be in the shadow of his. As we drink, let us pray that God would help us to persevere to the end. Let's drink in remembrance of Christ. Yes, Lord Jesus, help us to persevere as your people together, the sanctified, the justified by your blood. We ask in your name, by the power of you, Holy Spirit. Amen.